Welcome to the Sunday morning worship service of DuPage Unitarian Universalist Church in Naperville, Illinois on July 17th, 2022. I'm Kelly Trombley-Freitag, your worship assistant today, and my pronouns are she, hers. We are so glad you are here, whether you are present in the sanctuary this morning or watching remotely. It is so good to be together. To keep us all as safe as possible, we'll remain masked, except that those of us on the chancel will remove our masks to speak from the microphone. As Unitarian Universalists, we hold that there are many paths to truth and meaning, and we support one another on our spiritual and religious journeys. Whether you are a member or friend of this congregation or have recently discovered us, we are glad that you are with us this morning. Whoever you are and wherever you are welcome here. Finally, we are grateful for the help of our many Sunday volunteers, including the greeters, offering counters, sound leaders, tech team, and ushers that make our services accessible and welcoming. Thank you all for being here this morning. Our chalice lighting is by the Reverend Katie Romano Griffin. May the flame of this chalice, the symbol of our faith, connect us to all who have come before us, all who are with us in body and spirit, and all who are yet to come into being. May it serve as a reminder of our unity and connection across all time and space.
Morning, friends. My name is Kat Gelder. My pronouns are she, her, and I am the chair of the Sunday Services Committee here at DuPage UU Church. I am respecting CDC recommendations by staying home today, though I feel fine, and I'm relying on the gracious work of our Sunday morning volunteers, especially our AV crew and Joe Tina, the worship associate today, to make this service work. I'm also grateful to the many tech workers, past and present, who made it possible for me to record myself on Zoom and email the video to our tech team. And I'm also grateful to each of you for joining us today, since after all that we have been through and all that we have witnessed, a reminder of our own humility probably doesn't sound very appealing right now. Yet I invite us to pause this morning and consider the ways that wonderful things also humble us. Not only wars and pandemics and violence and ignorance, but also courage and sacrifice and beauty and gratitude and kind words when we need them. When wonderful things are humbling to me, I feel more connected than ever to other people, to the planet, and to the universe. For we are, in the words of Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied up in a single garment of destiny. Our friends and family who experience oppression on a regular basis remind us that humility is not a virtue, it is a reality. We are not the main characters in the story of the universe or even the story of the earth. And we can stick our heads in the sand, or we can recognize it and cope with it, find in it both frustration and connection. In the words of Reverend Wayne B. Arneson, take courage, friends. The way is often hard, the path is never clear, and the stakes are very high. Take courage, for deep down, there is another truth. You are not alone.
It is time to gather. Today's story about humility is about a boy and a moose, and it's named "This Moose Belongs to Me" by Oliver Jeffers. Wilfred owned a moose. He hadn't always owned a moose. The moose came to him a while ago, and he just knew, that it was meant to be his. He thought he would call him Marcel. He began following Marcel, explaining the rules of how to be a good pet. And much of the time, it seemed as though the moose wasn't listening, but Wilfred knew he was, mostly because he followed Rule 4 very well. Not making too much noise while Wilfred plays his record collection. Sometimes the moose wasn't a very good pet. He generally ignored Rule 7, going whichever way Wilfred wants to go. The moose had a very good sense of direction, and Wilfred did not. And because the moose was particularly poor on Rule 7, subsection B, maintaining a certain proximity to home, Wilfred quickly learned to bring some string along on their outings so he could find his way back again. Sometimes the moose was an excellent pet. He had no trouble with Rule 11, providing shelter from the rain, or Rule 16, knocking down things that are out of Wilfred's reach. One day, as Wilfred discussed their plans for the coming year on a particular long walk, he made a terrible discovery. Someone else thought she owned the moose. "Rodrigo, you're back!" Wilfred was dumbstruck. This moose was Marcel, not Rodrigo. The old lady was mistaken, and Wilfred thought it only proper that he correct her. "This moose belongs to me," he explained. And to prove it, he called Marcel. "Heel!" But the moose did not respond. He seemed more interested in the old lady. "Good, Rodrigo." Fine. Embarrassed and enraged, Wilfred rushed off for home. But in his haste, and miles from anywhere, he tripped over his string and got tangled up. And there he lay. Wilfred was beginning to get a little worried. It was getting late, and the monsters would be out soon. And he had just ruled out the last of his options when along came the moose and performed Rule 73 brilliantly, rescuing your owner from perilous situations. All was forgiven. And perhaps, Wilfred admitted, he never really owned the moose anyway. With that in mind, he and the moose reached a compromise. The moose would agree to all of Wilfred's rules whenever it suited him. "Dominic, you're back! And you brought me an apple." It is now time for the children to join me. Actually, you'll be joining Miss Wendy and Miss Agnes for religious education today. Any of the older youth, if you'd like to join us and be classroom helpers, you may join us, or you can stay in the service.
And now please rise and body your spirit for our song of affirmation and remain standing for the responsive reading afterwards. Since what we choose is what we are, and what we love we yet shall be. invite you to join me in the responsive reading from The Fragmented World by Philip Hewitt. From the fragmented world of our everyday lives, we gather together in search of wholeness.
By many cares and preoccupations, by diverse and selfish names, are we separated from one another and divided within ourselves.
Yet we know that no branch is utterly severed from the tree of life that sustains us all.
We cherish our oneness with those around us and the countless generations that have gone before us.
We would hold fast to all of good we inherit, even as we would leave behind us the outworn and the false.
We would escape from bondage to the ideas of our own day and from the delusions of our own fantasy.
Let us labor and hope for the dawning of a new day without hatred, violence, and injustice.
Let us nurture the growth in our own lives of the love that is shown in the lives of the greatest of men and women, the rays whose lamps still illuminate our day.
In this spirit we gather, in this spirit we pray. And please remain risen for our next hymn, which is number 83, Winds Be Still. We hold each other in our hearts and minds with all our joys and all our sorrows. We remember those facing health challenges and those experiencing losses. Even when the cares of the world weigh on us, may we find joy in our connections with each other and in the pleasures that life holds. Let us care for one another and for ourselves in all the ways that we can. As we hold each other in our hearts and minds, with all our joys and all our sorrows, whether spoken or unspoken, let us take a moment to be quiet together. Our meditation this morning is by Thich Nhat Hanh. Let us be at peace with our bodies and our minds. Let us return to ourselves and become wholly ourselves. Let us be aware of the source of being, common to us all and to all living things. Evoking the presence of the great compassion, let us fill our hearts with our own compassion towards ourselves and towards all living beings. Let us pray that we ourselves cease to be the cause of suffering to each other. With great humility, with awareness of the existence of life and of the sufferings that are going on around us, let us practice the establishment of peace in our hearts and on earth. Amen. The programs and operations of the church are supported by the voluntary contributions of our members and friends. Each month, we share our offerings with an organization nominated by the congregation and selected by the special offerings team. This month's organization is the Unitarian Universalist Prison Ministry of Illinois, or UUPMI, which equips UUs to transform institutions and transform people harmed by the prison industrial complex. The morning's offering to support the work of DuPage Unitarian Universalist Church and of UUPMI is given and received in a spirit of generosity and gratitude.
In the following reading, Zen Master Thich Nhat Hanh explains the Buddhist concept of emptiness. You can also watch it on YouTube on the Plum Village channel. It is titled, "To Be is to Interbe." In the reading, he refers to the Heart Sutra, in which the Bodhisattva Avalokitesvara, or Avalokita, teaches the monk Sariputra that form is emptiness, and emptiness is form. And all things are empty. Nothing is born, nothing dies, nothing is pure, nothing is stained, nothing increases, and nothing decreases. The words of Thich Nhat Hanh. Many people think to be empty means not existing, but it's not true. In the Heart Sutra, we recite, "Form is emptiness, and emptiness is form." So for example, there is a glass with some tea, and this glass is not empty. It has some tea in it. And there is another glass that has no tea. In order to be empty and not empty, the glass has to be there. So emptiness does not mean non-existence. The emptiness of the glass does not mean the non-existence of the glass. It is there, but it is empty. It's like this flower. It's beautiful. It's a wonder of life. But the flower is impermanent. It will not last forever, and it is empty. And empty does not mean non-existent. When we look deeply into a flower like this, we have the impression that the flower is full of everything. There is sunshine inside. There is a cloud inside. There is the earth, minerals. Even our consciousness is in the flower. Time, space, everything. It looks like everything in the cosmos has come together in order to help the flower to manifest as a wonder. So the fact is that the flower is full of the cosmos. But why did the Bodhisattva Avalokita say that everything is empty? So we can ask the Bodhisattva, if they are listening, "Dear Bodhisattva, you said that everything is empty, but we see that everything is full of the cosmos. To be empty means to be empty of something. This glass is empty of tea, true, but it's not empty of air. It's full of air. So the interesting question is, empty of what? Mr. Bodhisattva, you say that everything is empty. Empty of what? It's full of the cosmos." And the Bodhisattva will smile and say, "It is empty of a separate existence. It's full of everything else, but it doesn't have a separate existence, because a flower cannot be by herself alone. The flower is made only of non-flower elements. Sunshine is a non-flower element. Cloud is a non-flower element. And there are a multitude of non-flower elements coming together to produce a flower. A flower cannot be by herself alone. To be means to interbe.
And now please rise and body your spirit and join us in hymn number 298, "Wake Now My Senses." Wake now my senses and hear the earth call. Feel the deep power of the all. Keep with the well of creation your vow.
I just love the story from the time to gather today. And it's in part because I see a lot of myself in Wilfred, the boy who thought he owned a moose. My mom will tell you that this is accurate. I was a very stubborn child and convinced that I knew best. And my child is no different, so you can imagine how that goes. Sometimes it's really stressful that she doesn't immediately see the wisdom of all my ideas. In fact, one day just recently, I was really irritated by something we disagreed about. And I went to my mom and I asked, when do kids realize that you actually know something and they don't disagree with you just because they think they know better? When does that stage end? Well, my mom is a very comforting person, and I assumed that she would laugh and say something hopeful like, if you can just make it another 15 years, you'll be all right. But instead, she looked me straight in the eye and she smiled and she said, well, so far your stage has been going on for about 39 years, with no end in sight. Oh, but she was right. How often do we think the moose belongs to us, that our perspective makes the most sense and everyone else is just confused? I did that 3 times this morning before breakfast. And looking at the world around us, I think a little more humility would do us a lot of good. I certainly needed that reminder from my mom that I was focusing too much on believing I was right. But what kind of humility do we want for the world and for ourselves? Personally, I don't see any use at all in the harmful messages of humility that are tied to some Christian teachings, that we are all worms before God or inveterate sinners or something else awful. These messages have hurt many people I know, and they continue to hurt our world, especially when people claim them as wisdom. No, I think humility for Unitarian Universalists needs to come from a different source, preferably many different sources, knowing us. And today I'm going to share some sources that have been useful to me, and I would love to hear from all of you, later, obviously, what has been helpful to you in thinking about humility. One source that I think resonates deeply for UUs is the interconnectedness of the natural world, as revealed to us through the lens of science. And this is a deep source of humility. One of my favorite scientific fun facts is that, as Carl Sagan once said, we are made of star stuff. The vast majority of the elements that make up our world, carbon, oxygen, nitrogen, gold, were made in the furnaces of stars long ago and released into the universe in giant supernova explosions. And so every atom in every breath that you breathe was made in a star. Every muscle in your body, made of stars. Your best friend and your most feared enemy, star stuff. Same for the rocks and the mosses and the planet Mars. And this interconnectedness, as revealed through biology and astrophysics, is what I think about when I hear Thich Nhat Hanh say that a flower is empty of a separate existence. The flower is star stuff, and so am I. And remembering this always humbles me in the most terrifying and exhilarating ways. It's a reminder that I am not that special. After all, parts of me were born in the same star as the mud in my backyard. And genetically speaking, I am 99.9% the same as some truly awful people. Heck, genetically speaking, I'm 60% the same as a banana. And yet, I am unique. Statistically, I am either an accident or a miracle, or both. When I first began working on this service, I wanted to include the reading I did earlier by Thich Nhat Hanh, but I did not know his work very well. I just knew that I found it helpful. And I admit I was hesitant to use it at first because it all seems a bit lofty to say, the flower is empty of separateness. I mean, that's nice and everything, but what does a monk in a monastery know about reminding yourself that you're empty and yet full of the cosmos when the kids are whining and dinner isn't ready and the cost of food just went up 20%. I wondered, and so I did a little bit of research. And I was humbled to learn that Thich Nhat Hanh was born in 1926 in Vietnam during French colonial oppression. He lived during the Japanese occupation and the Great Famine that followed, and then through the Vietnam War. He developed a new form of meditation in response to the grief and violence of that time. And he was no stranger to suffering, and yet he never gave up on his vision that a renewal of Buddhism and socially engaged Buddhism could create a more peaceful world. Another source of humility that's helpful for me has been the book Gathering Moss by biologist Robin Wall Kimmerer, in which she approaches one of the humblest of plants from multiple perspectives. Not only her scientific training and expertise on mosses, but teachings from her native heritage and observations from her own life. It's her goal to tell the stories of moss, often overlooked by modern Western science, but just as essential as every other part of the world, with their own lives, communities, and history. In one of the essays contained in her book, Kimmerer explains that indigenous ways of knowing teach that each living being has a particular role to play. These gifts are also responsibilities, a way of caring for each other, she says. And she asks the question, what is the gift that mosses share with the people? And so she goes on to investigate indigenous uses of moss, only to learn that the elders she interviewed could tell her nothing. Too many generations of survival and loss stretched between Kimmerer and the people who may have known the uses of moss. So she turned to academic sources, and she discovered that native dictionaries contained numerous names for different types of moss. Surely, she thought, this means that people used them for something. And yet, they rarely showed up in anthropological texts about indigenous groups. Perhaps, Kimmerer writes, the limited information on mosses in 19th century anthropology is rooted in the fact that most of the observers of indigenous communities were upper crust gentlemen. They focused their studies on what they could see, and what they could see was conditioned by the world they came from. Their notebooks bulged with records of the pursuits of men, hunting, fishing, and making tools. When moss once appeared in a weapon, as wadding behind a harpoon tip, it was described in considerable detail. And then, just at the point when I'm ready to give up the search, I find it. A single entry. You can almost hear the blush in the brevity of the statement. Moss was used in widespread use for diapers and sanitary napkins. Now, this seems like it might be an appropriate topic to touch on in a Sunday service reflection, but I want to challenge that association. It makes us giggle a little. Not something we talk about a lot, but diapers, and yes, sanitary napkins, are pretty important stuff. Just ask someone who needs one but doesn't have one. And surely, the care of children should be one of the most important focuses for any community. Surely the humble use of mosses is worth remembering, worth noticing, worth recording. And yet, what we see is conditioned by the world we come from. What would the world be like if the most basic of resources in our world were celebrated, not taken for granted? What would it be like to have the humblest and thus most essential of jobs be rewarded generously and gratefully? What would it be like to live in a world where marginalized people's stories were deeply listened to and admired for their stunning persistence in the face of terrifying opposition? What would it be like for people and churches and governments to regret the harm they have caused and apologize and work to make amends? It sounds like a much more humble world, a world that the past 2 years have made clear we do not live in, but dearly need. I believe that I am unique, but not special. The moose does not belong to me. I do not believe that we are a city on the hill, a beacon for all to follow towards goodness. No, we are flawed, humble star stuff. We are empty of separateness. But this can be liberating instead of defeating to realize this. We are not special, yes, but that means we do not need to limit ourselves with the burdens of perfection and superiority. Instead, we can recognize that we are one among many, that the struggle for peace and joy is not new, that we can learn from the wisdom of those who came before and those who struggle now. And we can realize that tiny as we are in this huge world, our actions still make a difference. For if Robin Wall Kimmerer's words matter, if my mother's wisdom still guides my life years after she has shared it, and if the work of Thich Nhat Hanh and Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King matter today, even after their deaths, then the actions we take now will touch tomorrow. We need not work perfectly, but work we must. May we make of our lives moments of significance, as beautiful as a flower and as empty of separateness. And may we remind ourselves and others to embrace the humility of stones and long dead stars and the moss beneath our feet. So may it be. So may we make it together.
Please rise in body or spirit and join us in hymn number 131, Love Will Guide Us. It is customary to end the Sunday service with a benediction. This week, as humanity collectively peered further into the universe than ever before, I'd like to close with an image from the James Webb Space Telescope and some words from Carl Sagan describing science awakening us to the realization we are not the center of the universe. By the 19th century, observational astronomy had made it clear that the sun is but one lonely star, and our Milky Way galaxy is but one of many. In fact, the Milky Way galaxy is one of billions, perhaps hundreds of billions of galaxies, notable neither in mass, nor in brightness, nor in how its stars are configured and arrayed. Some modern deep sky photographs show more galaxies beyond the Milky Way than stars within the Milky Way. Every one of them is an island universe containing perhaps 100 billion suns, Such an image is perhaps a profound sermon on humility. However painful, we have not been given the lead in the cosmic drama. And we are all that we have to rely on here on this pale blue dot in the wide universe. May we move forward together in humility, in love, in connected community.